It's James Murray. We're in the Net News Ledger News Studio with Andrea Horwath, leader of Ontario's New Democrats. Budget came down yesterday, Andrea.
It did. Came down on the heads of Ontarians.
What does it mean for here in Northern Ontario?
Well, Northern Ontario is going to be paying the price for a bad budget, for a budget that makes life more difficult for people, doesn't focus on priorities of Ontarians, and doesn't help the Northwest at all in terms of schools, in terms of healthcare, in terms of hydro prices. All of these things are problematic. We're going to see cuts to education, closure of schools, firing of teachers. We're going to see hospital pressures continue, and of course here in Thunder Bay we know that's a big problem. It is all over the province, in fact, so we'll see hospitals closing, we'll see nurses laid off. This budget is not the budget that is not the plan that Kathleen Wynne ran on, James. It's not anything like what she ran on. She didn't talk about cuts to education and healthcare. She didn't talk about selling off our hydro to the private sector, and we're the ones that are going to have to pay the price.
Electricity prices in Thunder Bay are going up
Yep.
by about $6 a person, probably across the province. What's it going to mean to the average person's bill?
Well, we're going to see a pressure, double pressure, of course, here with the increases that are coming locally, as well as the provincial increases. So the changes will range from anywhere from $7, $10 to $25 a year. I mean, it just depends on your consumption, obviously, and it's another step towards making life less affordable. We should be going in the other direction. People can't pay the bills now. What the government, what the Liberals are saying is that hydro is going to go up 42% over the next couple of years. If they sell off our hydro, if they sell off Hydro 1, we're going to see the increases skyrocket even more than that, because the private sector has proven that when they take over public utilities, public assets, they raise the costs. They don't reduce the costs. So down south we have a highway called the 407 that got sold off, and people can't afford to drive on it. It's so expensive. We saw the sell-off of the generation of hydro with the Conservatives back in the 90s and early 2000s, and that jacked up our rates. Manitoba and Quebec, our two neighboring provinces, they kept their hydro public, and now they pay less than half of what we pay in rates, and our rates are going up. Our peak time rates are going up to 16 cents a kilowatt hour. You know, in Quebec and Manitoba, the rates are much less than that. They're less than half of that. I think they're around 6-7 cents a kilowatt hour.
It really means a lot for forestry and mining, which are huge consumers of electricity. We end up with things moving out of the province.
Well, that's the problem, and that's what we felt already with our electricity rates being so high. Not only is it a burden on families and on households. I mean, at the end of the month, you have to choose between paying the electricity bill, the hydro bill, or buying groceries. That's not a choice that people should be having to make. But it also means that yes, our economy is going to suffer. It's already not competitive in this province when it comes to the cost of operating, of doing business, and that's both large scale and small scale, but particularly for mining and forestry, where hydro is essential to the operations. It's not going to be a good thing to see those rates go up. Now, the Liberals have a budget that they claim addresses, the ability of forestry to take advantage of a discount program, but that's not new. Forestry has always been able to take advantage of the NEAR program, so the Liberals were, telling a little bit of a fib in their budget when they suggested that somehow this is a new thing.
Now, a lot of the First Nation groups across Ontario are not impressed with the budget. They're not impressed with the federal budget. They're not overwhelmed by the provincial budget. One of the areas that surprised me in that was there's no one stepping up on the issue of education and First Nations.
Well, it's education and First Nations, you're right. Nobody is stepping up. And I've looked at what some other provinces do in terms of trying to step in where the federal government has left a breach. And I think we need to seriously start looking at the possibility of having a respectful discussion with First Nations leaders around what can be done in a way that they feel is the best for their communities, because that's always the key, right? The other thing that we saw in the budget, instead of anything at all for First Nations, there was some throwaway line about safe drinking water, but no commitment No commitment at all in the budget for any help, for any money, just a throwaway line recognizing that clean water needs to be available, but not making any commitment to help in that, basically tossing it over to the federal government saying it's their responsibility.
Well, in December, I went north with the Toys for the North with the RCMP. We landed in Agoki Post, and one of the officers and I and a NAPS officer unloaded a plane full of water. And I asked myself, wow, you fly over and you see all these lakes.
Yeah.
And when I got back to Thunder Bay and started digging, it's $2.6 million in the last 15 years that have been used to fly water into a community. The federal minister has now committed to fix it. He did that in February. The Toronto media caught on to it this week, a couple months after we started talking about it. But the issue of safe drinking water is so key, and it's something that maybe Ontario needs to be saying, these are Ontario residents.
Absolutely.
Let's solve the problem.
Let's
and the
solve the
federal
problem.
government may come along afterward.
Well, there's no doubt. I mean, I think you said it right when you said stepping up. Somebody's got to step up, and instead, the two orders of government simply toss the hot potato back and forth. And who suffers? First Nations communities suffer. Kids suffer, families suffer, people suffer, and it's been a problem, as you say, for years now. Boil water is like the way of life. When it comes to First Nations and reserves, and it's absolutely wrong. We wouldn't accept it anywhere else in the province of Ontario. Why are we accepting it there?
You were at the Northern Ontario Municipal Association this morning. What was the message you delivered there?
Well, the message I delivered was that I respect the leadership of local communities. I used to be a local community representative as a city councillor in Hamilton, and I know that it's difficult. It's a difficult job, and unfortunately, this budget's going to make it more difficult and not easier. So first and foremost, we're going to see the residents that are living in northern communities hit hard when hydro prices go through the roof with the privatization. I was glad to hear from a number of municipal leaders that they're prepared to work with the NDP and others across the province, not just us, who are going to try to fight back on this hydro sell-off. In fact, some of them are going to be taking resolutions to their municipal councils that call on the government to back away from this wrong-headed plan. So that was good news. But I did put up the warning signals that they're going to see more pressure in their local hospitals. We know here in Thunder Bay there's a crisis already in terms of
gridlock.
It's in gridlock, and it has been since last year. $6 million shortfall in the budget this year, right? Or this last fiscal year. So that's not going to be fixed with a government that's continuing to cut back on healthcare spending. So there's a problem here, and I've warned them of that. I've warned them of the impact of the education cuts on their schools. I warned them that the MNR, and Ministry of Natural Resources, has been cut back by 4.2%. I've warned them that there's been cutbacks in Northern Development and Mines, and not as much, but there are still cutbacks. When you're cutting budgets at a time when you're not only are you getting the cut, but you're getting the kind of the built-in cut that comes from not even covering the inflationary costs. So it's not a good budget. It's going to be a very, very painful time. And so the people of the Northwest and the municipalities of the Northwest are going to be paying the price for the wrong decisions and the wastefulness and the scandals of the Liberal government.
So your next job is back to Queen's Park and try and pound common sense into a government you feel isn't listening.
Absolutely. I mean, I'm here in Thunder Bay. I'm going to be having a healthcare roundtable a little bit later today. I'm going to be meeting with some First Nations leadership as well. But yeah, when I get back to Toronto, that's my job. It's going to be, pounding the government and doing everything we can to organize an effort against the hydro sell-off, because you know what, the hydro sell-off provides the government with $4 billion, $4 billion, right? They are planning on infrastructure expenditures of $130 billion. The $4 billion is less than 3%. It's just about 3% of the total amount of money that they want to spend. If we kept our hydro utility intact, Hydro One, we would be able to make up that $4 billion over that 10-year period just with the revenues and the dividends that come in from Hydro One. So there's really no reason for the government to sell Hydro One, except that they're more interested in taking care of the shareholders on Bay Street than they are the people of Ontario. And so we're going to fight really hard on that one.
It sounds like, Andrea, you've got your work cut out for you.
As always, James.
And thank you for coming in and sharing with us and our readers and viewers.
My pleasure. Thank you.
I'm James.